it's me, Miss Rowe. I hope you're having an awesome day and an even awesomer week. So I have a pretty cool art project for you, and it is a paper plate fan. So what's cool about this is that one, it's just made out of half of a paper plate and just some chopsticks or some craft sticks, and I even added a cute little bow on there just so you can make it look a little bit nicer. And another cool part about it is that it works as an actual fan, or you can use it as a decoration as well. I love this project because you can do any design that you want on here with basically any material that you have. You could use markers like I did, crayons, paint, color pencils, really anything that you have available to you. And it's a super easy project that I think is pretty fun, and I'm excited to share it with you. So, okay, moving on to it.
Okay, so for materials, you're going to want a paper plate, preferably a white one. The thinner the paper plate, the better, I would say. Mine's a little bit thicker, but that's just because it's what I had. Some scissors to go ahead and cut that paper plate. You're also going to want a ruler to be able to draw a straight line. A pencil and a eraser will also be important when you're drawing your design on your paper plate. You're also going to want to get some either chopsticks or popsicle sticks or craft sticks. I only had chopsticks available at the time. And also just a little bit of ribbon in whatever color you want. It could also be just some string that you have to tie around as well. And some strong glue. I'm going to use hot glue. I know everybody doesn't always have that, but if you have just strong tape or something else, that works as well. And you're also going to want either markers, crayons, or colored pencils, or whatever you want to use to be able to color your piece. So for starters, you're going to want to take your plate and your ruler and your pencil as well. And you're basically just going to want to draw a line directly down the middle of the paper plate. And you don't really have to fret about if it's exactly in the middle or not. Just kind of eyeball it, do your best. Hold the ruler down with one hand and then try to keep your pencil as straight as possible, pointing upwards, and just lightly go ahead and go over that line. So even if it's not perfect, it just needs to be straight enough for you to be happy with it. So once you're done with that, go ahead and grab your scissors, and you can go ahead and start cutting that all the way off just as neatly as possible. Try to get as clean of a line as you can. Once you've done that, just make sure the edges are neat, and if you need to erase any extra little pencil marks, you can go ahead and do that. And then you can throw away the rest of the plate or use it to make another fan later. After that's done, you want to work on your design. So in my example, I used a lot of kind of crazy shapes, very rounded shapes, and some patterning. But that's just my example. The great part about this project is that you can decorate it literally however you want to. So if you want to draw a bunch of flowers or a rainbow or just anything else that interests you or you think would look cool, then do that. You definitely by no means need to copy what I'm doing. However, if you do want to copy what I'm doing, then you can go ahead and keep watching through, and I'll just briefly explain some of the different shapes that I'm drawing. But if you're not interested in that, which is totally fine, you can go ahead and skip through this part of the video to move on to the next step. So for my design, I drew several different sized donuts basically around my page, and then I started drawing some kind of like splattered amoeba looking shapes almost. And just to add some extra interest to it, I also added some kind of squiggly lines that went around my page. And also, I thought it'd be pretty cool to make it look like my squiggly lines and my amoeba shapes were behind my donuts. So it looks like some of my objects are layered on top of each other. Some of my shapes are layered, just to make it look a little bit cooler. So that's just one idea, but really the main purpose of the design that I'm doing is to kind of break up the space a little bit more and to just make it look really fun and kind of abstract, so it doesn't really look like anything. I just wanted to draw kind of a cool doodle design. I also added in some, I guess you could call them straight worm shapes almost. And I tried to, and I did this with all my shapes, but I tried to space out my different shapes around my paper plate. And remember, if you need to erase anything, you always have your eraser there. This is my finished product just for how it looks with the drawing on it. And so then the next part that we're going to be working on is coloring. So I chose to use markers, but of course you could use crayons or colored pencils or paint or really anything that you have that you would like to use. I used marker in my example, and I believe I used maybe 5 or 6 different colors, which, can be kind of a lot, but again, there's no right or wrong way to do it necessarily, so I decided to choose 5 more colors of my own. So you just want to make sure that 1, your colors look good together, and 2, just for a personal preference of mine is to have some colors that are lighter, like the really light yellow and light purple and blue, and then have some other colors that are darker, like that dark green and that darker orange. So once you've got that done, you basically just want to go ahead and just start coloring in your shapes. How I like to start is I like to start coloring in the tinier parts first, just because I don't want to accidentally go over any of it with some of my other marker later for my bigger shapes, especially if those colors are touching. But again, like I said, it's really whatever you're comfortable with in terms of how you want to approach it, but you basically just want to go ahead and color it in. Like I did with my shapes earlier, like I said, I like to spread them out. I also like to spread out my colors as well so that my colors aren't always touching each other. Just because I think that it helps the design just pop more, look a little bit more interesting, and I just kind of like spacing out the colors. One thing that I did in my example is I tried to include some different patterning. Mainly I just did polka dots in my example, but you could use whatever patterns that you want, especially if you're doing a design like mine. So I thought that it would be kind of cool to do sort of a stripe design pattern as well, and include some polka dots in certain areas just to kind of add in some extra layers of fun. Also, you just want to go ahead when you're coloring and just remember to take your time, be careful, especially if you're using a lighter color marker and you're using it near like a dark color, like the darker green that I'm going against right now, because sometimes the colors can bleed together, which, you might have already figured out by now, but just keep that in mind. Just try to be a little bit more careful when you're coloring in. Also, when you're coloring on the ridges of the plate, assuming that your plate kind of has some ridges like mine do, you can always try to play with how you're holding the plate to be able to reach some of those areas a little bit easier to be able to color and get in all of those little white areas. So I skipped forward to after I'd colored in a few areas. So one thing to keep in mind is that you can use some of the white space in your paper plate to your advantage. You don't have to color in the entire paper plate because, especially with markers, that can take a really long time. So adding in some pretty easy patternings like this polka dot thing that I'm doing here can be sort of a time saver, but still add interest to your paper plate design. I thought it would even be cool to use several different colors of polka dots, so I used like orange polka dots and green polka dots and also purple polka dots, and I just kind of felt like that helped fill in some of that extra blank space. So once you're happy with your design, go ahead and if you have a hot glue gun, plug it in, or go ahead and get your super glue or your really strong tape or whatever you have, and get your chopsticks and break them apart. I think it helps to break them apart when you're holding them a little bit higher up, and just do it very carefully. Then go ahead and flip your paper plate over. I'm going to move my hot glue gun a little bit out of the way, and you're going to want to figure out how you want to arrange your chopsticks. So if you want it to look like my example, then this would probably be the best way to arrange them. Kind of like in an X shape, but you want the very top part of the X to be a lot bigger than the bottom part of the X. So as you can see, this is kind of where I arranged it and glued it on my example. So I'm basically just going to kind of be recreating that as well. And so if you're using chopsticks, I glued the thickest part on the plate, and the thinnest part I put towards the very bottom. So just try to arrange it as best you can and try to make sure that the middle is centered just to the best of your abilities. Once you feel like you have arranged them in a way that you're happy with, you want to go ahead and take one of your hands, just lightly hold down your chopstick and take your pencil and just basically make one line going down the side of the chopstick, just so when you're gluing it down, it can kind of help you remember exactly how you were planning on arranging your chopsticks. Once your hot glue gun is ready, or you have your super glue or your tape or whatever you're using to basically adhere the chopsticks to the back of your plate, then you can go ahead and just put a bunch of glue right down that line where you drew with the pencil line. And once you've done that, very quickly take your chopstick, again with the thickest part being glued on, and just try to arrange it along that line that you drew earlier. And again, if you're using hot glue, remember that it's hot. You're going to probably need a parent to help you out with that. And just hold it down. You don't have to worry about touching the glue. Just hold it down for a little bit so it stays in place. And then as an extra precaution, you don't necessarily have to do this. I added some extra hot glue to the sides just to make sure that it would stay in place. So once that's done, you can basically just do the exact same thing with the other side and the other chopstick. Once the other chopstick is secured down, you want to go ahead and just add a tiny bit of glue right in the middle of where your chopsticks are meeting. Again, if you're using tape, you can always tape it around a little bit, or again, if you're using super glue, just add a little bit. It doesn't need to be too much. You don't want it, kind of flowing outwards. So, and again, just make sure that you secure all of your other chopsticks or your craft sticks, whatever you're using, down. And just go ahead and let that dry for just like a few minutes, depending on what you're using. It shouldn't really take that long, honestly. Also, as a side note, if you have a very thick paper plate like mine, I think that it's more important to use a really strong glue like hot glue. But if you are using like a pretty flimsy paper plate or a really, really thin one, then you could get away with using probably a less strong glue than what I'm using. So once that's done and everything seems pretty dry and pretty secure, you can kind of see how it looks, which still looks nice the way that it is, but I like to take a little bit of ribbon. As you can see on my example, I had a little bit of gold ribbon. And for my example now, I wanted to use a little bit of just like gold ribbon / string. And you don't really need too much, but it's better to cut a little bit more than a little bit less just in case. And I wanted to go ahead and tie it around where the chopsticks meet, just to kind of cover up some of that glue and make it look a little bit more decorative and presentable. So I went ahead and tied a knot around it, and then I tied a double knot just to extra make sure that it was secure, and then I tied a bow. So if you are having issues with this, remember, feel free to ask your parent or somebody else to help you. But once you're happy with it, then you are done with your fan. And you can, again, use it as an actual fan if you want to, or you could use it to decorate somewhere, or you could give it to somebody. It's up to you. But either way, you now have a very nice paper plate fan. And again, if you want to use that other half of the plate that you had from earlier, you could even make 2 paper plate fans, twice the fun. Either way, I would love to see what you guys come up with. Please send it to me, and I hope you have a great week.